The camp no longer felt like a home. What remained of it lay scattered across the plain, charred poles, torn hides, broken tools half buried in ash. The smell of smoke clung stubbornly to the air, mixing with the copper scent of blood and loss. Evening crept in slowly, painting the sky in bruised purples and dying reds, as if the land itself mourned what had happened there. 4 women stood among the ruins, unmoving, as though stepping away would make the truth final. Atsa knelt first, her fingers pressing into the warm dust where her husband's fire pit had been. She did not cry. Her grief was heavy, settled deep in her chest like a stone that refused to break apart. Years of life had taught her that tears did not bring the dead back. Nearby, Nita hugged herself tightly, her shoulders shaking despite the heat. She was young, too young to be alone in a world that devoured the unguarded. Every shadow made her flinch, every distant sound a warning of what might come next. Kaya and Shyla stood a little apart, their backs straight, eyes fixed on the open land beyond the camp. They had seen raids before. They knew that when warriors fell, women became prizes or warnings. Staying meant waiting for whoever came next. That was when the sound reached them. Slow, deliberate hoofbeats, not rushing, not hiding, all 4 turned as one. A single rider emerged from the horizon, cutting through the fading light. His horse moved with practiced ease, its head low, its muscles lean. The man upon it wore no Apache marks. His clothing was unfamiliar, his posture calm but alert, as if every part of him was listening. Cuman? Fear tightened Nita's breath, but none of them ran. There was nowhere left to run to. The rider slowed when he saw them, his dark eyes taking in the burned camp, the empty space where men should have stood. He did not reach for a weapon, but his hand rested close enough to promise he could. Atsa rose to her feet and stepped forward, dust clinging to her skirt. Her voice, when she spoke, was rough but steady. "If you leave us here, we will not see another sunrise." The rider studied her, then the others. Silence stretched between them, thick and dangerous. Nita found her courage and whispered, barely louder than the wind, "Save us. Take us with you." The man did not answer at once. His gaze moved from face to face, weighing something unseen. In that moment, the 4 widows understood that their lives now rested on the choice of a stranger, riding alone through a broken land. The rider remained still long after the last plea faded into the evening air. The wind tugged at the loose edge of his cloak, carrying the smell of burned wood and death toward him. He had seen aftermaths like this before, camps erased, families reduced to silence. It was easier to ride past such places, easier to tell himself that survival demanded distance. Yet the 4 women stood where others would have fled, their fear visible but mastered, their eyes fixed on him as if he were the last solid thing in a collapsing world. He dismounted slowly, making no sudden movement that might be mistaken for threat. The ground crunched beneath his boots. Up close, the women could see the lines of travel etched into his face. The scars that spoke of battles, survived rather than sought. His name was Arslan, though he did not offer it. Names created ties, and ties carried weight. "You know what you ask," he said at last. His voice was low, shaped by long distances and few conversations. "The path I walk is not gentle. I do not stop in safe places." Kaya answered him without hesitation. "There are no safe places left for us." Nita swallowed and nodded, while Shyla's hands curled into fists at her sides. Atsa held his gaze steadily, neither begging nor bowing her head. Arslan noticed that. Strength recognized strength, even when worn thin by grief. He looked past them to the empty camp, counting what was not there. 4 women meant 4 lives to protect. Slower travel, louder fires, more tracks. Anyone following him would see them from far away. Taking one might be manageable. Taking all 4 was an invitation to danger. Night began to gather. The first stars appeared, cold and distant. Somewhere beyond the ruins, a wolf called out, its voice long and hungry. Oslan knew what predators did when they sensed weakness. He also knew what happened to women left alone on the plains. The knowledge sat heavy in his chest, unwelcome but undeniable. "You would have to obey my rules," he said. "No fires unless I allow it. No wandering. When I say ride, you ride." Atsa inclined her head. "We have followed rules before. We can follow yours. He studied each of them once more. Nita's fear barely held together. Shyla's anger sharp as a blade. Kaya's watchfulness. Atsa's quiet authority. They were not helpless, only unprotected. Erdlan exhaled slowly, as if releasing a decision he had already made. "Gather what you can carry," he said. "Only what you need. We leave before the moon climbs high." For a moment, none of them moved, as if they feared the words might vanish. Then Nita let out a shaky breath that sounded almost like a laugh. The others turned toward the ruins, moving with purpose for the first time since the raid. As darkness settled over the broken camp, Arslan stood watch. He told himself he was not rescuing them, not claiming responsibility. He was simply refusing to leave 4 lives behind. Yet even as he thought it, he knew that from this moment on, none. The days that followed tested them more harshly than grief ever had. The land stretched wide and unforgiving, its beauty offering no mercy. They rose before dawn, when the air was still cool and the world felt watchful rather than hostile. Arslan set the pace without explanation, and the women learned quickly that questions slowed movement. When he stopped, they stopped. When he listened, they learned to hold their breath and let silence speak. At first, Nita struggled the most. Her hands shook when she mounted the horse, and every sudden sound sent her heart racing. More than once, Arslan reached out wordlessly to steady her, his grip firm but respectful. He did not mock her fear, nor did he soften his expectations. Slowly, she learned balance, then confidence. By the 3rd day, she no longer looked at the ground when she rode. Shyla watched everything Arslan did. She memorized the way he checked the wind, the way his eyes swept the horizon before he allowed rest. When she asked for a bow, he studied her a moment, then handed her one without ceremony. Her first shots missed badly, but her jaw tightened with each failure. By the time they crossed the dry riverbed, her arrows began to land where she intended. Gaia proved sharp in different ways. She spoke little, but when traders passed at a distance, she recognized markings, gestures, routes. She warned Arslan of a detour that would avoid unwanted attention, and he took it without questioning her knowledge. Trust, once given, grew quietly between them. Atsa held them together. She divided food without favor, soothed arguments before they took shape, and reminded them when exhaustion threatened to break discipline. Arslan noticed how the others gravitated toward her, how even fear seemed to ease when she spoke. Leadership did not always announce itself. Sometimes it simply endured. Nights were the hardest. They slept lightly, wrapped close against the cold, with Arslan keeping watch longer than any one man should. No fire burned unless the land offered cover. The women learned to eat cold food without complaint, and to rest without comfort. Yet something unexpected took root among them. A rhythm, a sense of belonging forged by shared hardship. One evening, as the sky darkened into deep blue, Atsa sat beside Arslan while the others slept. "You could have left us," she said quietly. "Many would have." He stared out across the plain, where the grass moved like water. "Leaving is easier," he replied, "but it costs more than it saves." She nodded, understanding without further words. By then, the journey had already changed them all. They were no longer widows, clinging to survival. They were a small, moving circle of purpose, bound not by blood or tribe, but by the simple, stubborn choice to keep going together. The land began to change as the weeks passed. The endless plains, giving way to rolling hills and scattered trees that offered both shelter and uncertainty. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of water and unfamiliar soil. For the first time since they had left the ruined camp behind, the future no longer felt like a single narrow path of survival, but something wider, filled with possibilities they had not dared to imagine. They moved differently now. Nita rode with her head high, her laughter returning in small, cautious bursts when the tension eased. She spoke of memories without breaking, and at night she sometimes sang softly, her voice thin but steady, filling the darkness with something gentle. Shyla walked with a hunter's confidence, but always within reach, her eyes sharp and alert. Danger no longer paralyzed her. It focused her. Gaia negotiated when they encountered distant traders, her words careful, her instincts precise. She understood the value of silence as well as speech. Atsa remained the anchor, She rose before the others, her movements deliberate, her presence reassuring. Grief had not left her, but it no longer ruled her. Instead, it had shaped her into something unyielding. When doubt surfaced, it was her voice that reminded them how far they had come and why they still rode forward. Arslan watched these changes with quiet respect. He had taken them with him, believing he was merely sparing 4 lives from a cruel end. He now understood that the choice had reshaped his own path as much as theirs. The road felt less empty. The nights, though still dangerous, carried a warmth he had long forgotten. When they reached the edge of known lands, Arslan slowed his horse. Beyond the rise lay new routes, new dangers, and new beginnings. He did not tell them what to do. The decision was no longer his alone. They gathered together, the wind tugging at their clothing, the horizon wide before them. Nita was the first to speak. "I'm not ready to be left behind again." Kaya nodded. "Neither am I." Shyla's grip tightened on her bow. "Where you ride, I can ride." Atsa met Arslan's gaze. There was no plea in her eyes, only choice. "We go on together." He inclined his head, accepting what had already been decided. They were not captives, nor burdens, nor lost widows, waiting for rescue. They were travelers who had chosen one another. As they rode forward, the past remained behind them, never forgotten, but no longer defining. The world had tried to break them, to scatter them into silence. Instead, they moved as one, carrying their scars and their strength into the open land ahead, unbroken and unafraid, taken not by force, but by will,